Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have the ISFJ Careers panel. And so Julie, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Sure. I am a writer, actress, and a library aide, and my career background is primarily in writing and editing, primarily for magazines. I'm the former managing editor of Catholic Digest magazine, and I've worked in the marketing and communications department of Boston University, and right now I'm working on a novel.
Heck yes. Librarian is a stereotypical ISFJ job, so that's pretty cool. And Natalie?
So I currently work as a library assistant, and I've been doing that in my current job for about 2 years now.
See, I told you guys, librarian is an ISFJ thing.
When I was in about third grade, I was part of an acting group, and we all had to go around the circle and say what we wanted to be. And I said I wanted to be an actress and a librarian, and I didn't understand why people laughed because they seemed like such contradictory careers, but to me it made perfect sense.
I actually love that. I feel like that combines kind of like the detail-orientedness of introverted sensing and like the dramatic expression of extroverted feeling. So that's great. So I work as a library assistant currently, and then I also worked part-time in a library for about 3 years previous to my current job. And I've worked in retail. I've done a lot of like customer service type of stuff. And then in my free time, I like to read and write. That's probably my main hobby. As far as work, it's interesting because I actually got into MBTI because of careers, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I remember looking at the list of like ISFJ careers, and it was all stuff like nurse and teacher, and like I didn't want to do any of those things. But I was really interested in libraries, and I'd always wanted to work in a library. And then years later, when I was working in a library, I found some article in a database about how like I don't remember if it was about Myers-Briggs types and careers, I think. And it said that librarian was like the most common career for an ISFJ. And I was like, this is crazy that, I kind of, I kind of had to throw away the notion of Myers-Briggs and, matching that up with my career back when I got into Myers-Briggs, because I didn't think that any of the careers I wanted to do like lined up with my type, but I ended up lining up pretty well with my type anyway. So that's kind of funny.
That's mind-blowing. And so I'm seeing a pattern with Julie and Nat that you both like writing and libraries. So that's cool. And Jane?
Hi. I'm going to break the pattern a little bit. While I do enjoy writing, I've been in science for the entirety of my full-time career, which has only been 3 years. But yeah, I've been in biotech, and I've been at the same company since leaving school, basically.
Nice. It's good to have variety too, so it's good to have your perspective. All right. And so, hi, my name is Joyce, and I'm a certified MBTI Master Practitioner, and I facilitate the theoretical understanding in organizations. I also help people on the self-discovery process of figuring out their best fit type, and I also coach people. Cool. And so, ISFJs, I'm wondering, how do you think you approach work differently than other types?
I mean, I could say that I think the attention to detail is a pretty big piece. And while everybody has to do that to some extent in their jobs, I think that it's something that I know I am very attuned to, and that I pay attention to a lot in any work that I do, whether it's writing or acting or working at the library. So I tend to ask a lot of questions, want to find out all the processes and procedures and rules that need to be followed, and make sure that I'm ticking off all those boxes. And I think that some folks are a little more focused on, okay, just give me the essentials, give me the big picture, and I'll go from there. And that can be certainly an advantage in some cases, and in other cases, the attention to detail is really important. Like for instance, with being an editor, doing a lot of proofreading and line editing, you really do have to pay attention to the slightest detail. And so that's a plus in that regard. But you can certainly also get too focused on details and other aspects and lose the forest for the trees. So,
yeah, I was just going to echo the attention to detail for sure. And then I've also found that, like, for some reason, I don't know if other people I work with do this, but I have this like notebook and I write everything down that I need to do. And I'm like, I have to be very organized or I'll like forget stuff. So I have all these lists that I make and everyone always comments on my notebook. It's kind of funny. Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like you guys have really great attention to detail and people perceive you to be an organized person.
Yeah, I could pretty much echo the same thing. Definitely very attentive to detail. And especially, I guess, like in the type of work I do, there's a lot of people that are more, like big picture, like just trying to think of like all these different possible ways to approach a problem. And yeah, I find that usually attention to detail and like that kind of thoroughness is very appreciated because it's not always a strength that everyone has. But yeah, that and just like being very like more careful when approaching things and just making sure to like always double check things, not make mistakes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so Jane, you bring out the element of carefulness. And so how does that show up in your day-to-day work lives?
Well, I definitely, when I'm like preparing to do something or just like, setting up an experiment or just something like that, I definitely can take a little longer to like plan things out than other people. Cause kind of like what Natalie was saying, like, I feel like I have to, like, I don't know, I have to write a list or literally write like steps of, or like notes to myself of what to do, just so I make sure that in the moment I don't forget. But the extra time up front usually pays off because then like once I actually get started, it's not like I'm running around because I like forgot a bunch of things. I feel like that's the biggest way it shows up. Definitely the thoroughness and the carefulness can add time, but usually it's time well spent.
I definitely relate to that. I'm also a big list maker and preparer. Just preparing for this panel, I printed out my little document with notes and notes about the cognitive functions. And then before setting up, I used a checklist that I use over Zoom to make sure that, my phone is out of the room and the iPhone is set on silent and that my mouse is plugged in case I need to use it. And all of those things do take time to establish. And I know that other people would just, I think, go insane trying to create checklists like that. But for me, it really helps. And it helps me feel like I have more control over the situation and that I'm prepared. And so I definitely relate to that idea of being more meticulous and thorough and feeling more prepared as a result.
Whereas on the other hand, I have panelists who forget to silence their phone, even when I have told them to silence their phone. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I appreciate you ISFJs taking care of that.
Yeah, I can relate to like wanting to be prepared for things and feeling like my dad's an ISTJ and he talks about how like he gets really frustrated with people he works with because they never have time to do things right the first time, but they always have time to go back and fix stuff. So that's kind of like the preparedness element too that I can also relate to. I also feel like I don't really get involved with like office politics. Like I almost feel like sometimes I'm the last to know and there's like some kind of conflict in the office or like I don't know. I don't like drama. So yeah, might be a little bit different about me as an ISFJ as well.
Yeah. Speaking of not wanting drama, how does that show up in your dynamic at work? How do you stay as drama-free as possible? And what do you do when there is drama?
I feel like I'm usually just listening to people vent about it. And I don't know, I guess Sometimes it's just because like I don't notice stuff, or like I don't see certain, like, it's not that I don't notice, like if people tell me about a certain like interpersonal dynamic or whatever, then I'll be aware of it. But I feel like sometimes I don't pick up on those like undercurrents or whatever of stuff going on, and I'll be like confused. And then someone will explain to me, oh yeah, we have this like beef or whatever going back years. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like I guess I'm very conflict avoidant. So maybe that's why. But yeah, I'm usually just like the person people go to talk to about it. And I don't have beef with anyone.
I can relate to that. I think one of the things that I could add is, I don't know if it's having the FE or something else, but I feel like one thing I try to be very attuned to in any work environment and any personal environment is how different people like to operate, and also just their different feelings on things. And I feel like I try to put myself in their shoes. So a lot of times if, say, a colleague is frustrated with another colleague because of the way that they operate, I understand that and I might agree to some extent, but I also am hearing the other person's point of view. And so sometimes I feel like I'm able to be a good intermediary and help breach the gap between the two sides. And it's not that I would need to change my personality to relate to each person, but it's just a bit of a shift in approach. So for instance, if I have one colleague that really likes to be chatty before we get a meeting started, I would try to be a little more chatty. But if I had another colleague who really likes to just get down to business and not have a lot of detail and just get the facts, then I try to accommodate that as well. And I think that can be really helpful in the work environment and avoiding some of the drama. So part of it, I think, is based on understanding and shifting your approach to different people and different personalities. And some of it is also certainly, I think, being a good listener and being someone that people like to go to more than someone who gets ideally involved in the drama. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying.
Yeah, because ISFJs have extroverted feeling, there is going to be this element of molding or accommodating or adjusting yourself to the other person to make them as comfortable and as happy as possible, for lack of a better word. It's like trying to make them feel welcomed or cared about or comforted, which is excellent, Julie.
I definitely relate about trying to be basically like a good listener, because I also try to not be directly involved when there is drama. Sometimes, depending on the environment, it can get trickier than other times, but I try to be like pretty neutral. And when people do, like people want to vent about things, I do try to make sure they feel heard, but at the same time, like sometimes offer like little tidbits of why another person might be like acting the way they are. So it is kind of like, I don't know, just it's like trying to soften things, but also making sure the other person feels heard.
Yeah, I notice ISFJs are really good at giving you the space to say your piece. And so because they're very polite, they want to make sure that they're respecting whatever social norms are happening right now. So if it seems like you might want to speak, they might give you the floor first, which is very considerate. And I notice it with this panel too. You're like giving everyone else the floor in case they want to talk.
Well, I could say with letting people say their bit, I definitely agree with that. I could say that one area where that sometimes gets a little tricky for me is whenever I'm doing an interview for a story. So you have a time limit, you've set up an interview for, say, half an hour or 20 minutes or 45 minutes with somebody. And sometimes someone starts to go on a tangent and they go off for a while, and that you have only so many minutes left in the interview. And I've always found it challenging to break in and say something like, oh, that's so interesting, but I just want to bring you back to such and such a point. And sometimes you have to do that, but I've always found that very awkward. I think that's probably the FE part of feeling like, oh gosh, I don't want this person to feel uncomfortable, or like I'm, being rude or not listening to what they're saying. So that's kind of a career related point about the listening side.
Yeah, I definitely struggle to be assertive in that regard too. And I think it's also like an issue, like even my boss has talked to me about like the one thing you need to do more of is like speak up during meetings. Cause I can be very shy in group settings. And I don't know if this is an ISFJ thing necessarily, but I'm also just a pretty shy person. So it takes me a while to get comfortable in any group and feel comfortable kind of voicing my opinion. Yeah.
On the topic of meetings and like group settings, I definitely feel, like it could be really hard to speak up or like try to interject. I guess just kind of in general, it also reminds me of like class discussions, like in school. Just when things are moving really fast, especially, you try to wait for a good time to like get a word in, and it just like doesn't really come, and then like the conversation moves on to a different topic, and I don't know, it could be very difficult. And sometimes just, if like maybe you only have like kind of a half-baked idea, or you're just still trying to form your thoughts on something, it's like you don't feel like it's ready to be shared. Well, maybe if it were like one-on-one, I would do it, but it feels like the stakes are so much higher when it's a bigger group. So I definitely think it is a little harder to like express ideas or opinions when it's like in a big group of people.
I would say for me in that context, it depends a lot on how comfortable I am with the people. So if it's a larger group, but I know a lot of the people and I'm comfortable in the topic and my place in the group and all of that, I think it's a lot easier to speak up and be assertive. I think if it's a larger group and you're like, I'm not as familiar with the people and the dynamics, and I'm not sure how a comment might be received, I'm going to be more reticent. I suppose that's probably typical of everybody to some extent, but perhaps ISFJs are more sensitive to that.
Yeah, I can relate to that too. I feel like it's hard to find, like, especially if it's a larger group of people, for me, it can be harder to find like an opening to, say my piece, because I feel like the people who are more talkative in the group will sometimes like monopolize the time. And I've really struggled with kind of just like inserting my opinion, even interrupting if I need to. But yeah, that can be really challenging for me as well.
Yeah. And so that provides other people a tip from that. It's like, if you notice there's an ISFJ in a meeting and someone is monopolizing all of the time, then it might be nice to spread out the speaking time. So I'm wondering about what things you've liked about jobs throughout all the jobs that you have. Like, what are some of like the common themes between the jobs that you liked more, and then some of the things that you disliked more about jobs?
Having worked a lot of customer service, I really enjoy helping people. I'm very introverted, but I love the feeling that I get when I can help someone. And most people are, either neutral or they're like really grateful that you're helping them. I think the more stressful side of that is when people get like rude or upset, or like the library where I currently work at, we've had certain quote unquote incidents with like people coming in and just being disruptive. Like there have been people who have like talking about, harming themselves or other people, like really kind of like high stakes seeming situations that I just, for a while there, it was like almost every weekend we were dealing with one of these. And I was just like, this cannot continue. I very much don't like the more stressful aspects of dealing with people. But I don't know. I like to, like I said, I'm pretty shy, but I sometimes like to like put on a customer service persona and just be like a little more outgoing and, ask people how their day is going. And it can be fun. I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned Nat being able to put on a warm demeanor when interacting with other people. And here's like a slight trend. I notice sometimes ISFJs have these random guys falling for them sometimes because they're so warm and friendly and amiable that people feel cared about by them. And then I notice ISFJs are actually a very charming type for some of them. And it can garner attention from the male population sometimes by accident. When FE just is doing things, it looks very caring and people are very drawn to the nurturingness of it. So,
Yeah, we have somebody at the library currently who always says hi to me when he walks past the desk. And it's been kind of an issue where like he's tried to monopolize people's time at the desk. And I have another coworker who is probably an ENFJ, and he really latched onto her as well. So that's kind of funny. But I do think FE has that kind of like warm, inviting aura, I guess, or feeling to it. And like, even when I'm not trying, like that's the thing. I'm not necessarily trying to like give special treatment to anybody. I think people just like pick up on the fact that you're a nice person, and they can kind of maybe become a little attached sometimes. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's not wanted. But then I have a hard time like kind of setting those boundaries in place. Like I can be assertive when I need to be, and that's what I've discovered over the years of working in customer service. I can also be really firm and really like direct, but it's definitely something that I have to kind of work myself up to do, rather than something that comes naturally. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of putting boundaries around the FE, I feel like in a work environment, it can be a little easier sometimes where, like, for instance, and this is not related to the romantic thing, but if you have, like, for instance, in a work environment, I definitely enjoy chatting with people, but I put pretty firm limits around that. Like, if I have to get my work done, I really don't have trouble getting my work done. And I might just say to someone, oh, I have to go help this person now, or I need to get this done, but I look forward to chatting more later. I find like it's easier to put those boundaries there. Whereas sometimes I think in just a general personal, in personal time, that can be a bit more challenging, where I don't have the sort of work excuse, or it's, my own time that I'm dealing with. I find it a little harder to set that boundary because the FE pushes a little harder.
yeah, well put. I find ISFJs, it feels like they, at least as an external person looking at an ISFJ, it looks like they do everything perfectly because of their detail orientation. Like they do whatever thing is in front of them really well, and they're nice, and so it attracts a lot of male population.
Some of it is just people gravitate toward being tended to and feeling that they're special. And I think that's something that, when you have FE, you're really attuned to another person and you can really focus on them, and in just a generic way, a platonic way, or a romantic way. And I think that is just an attractive quality to people in general. I think people can really feel heard and seen and attended to, and that just makes people feel good. So I think it makes sense that people of any kind would just gravitate toward that. And then, of course it can get misinterpreted, but generally speaking, on the positive side, I think it's, helping someone feel cared for in any way is just a good thing. And I think that's partly why it's appealing to other people.
Yeah, and so I'm wondering how ISFJs are like in a leadership position. How are you like in a leadership position? How would you imagine yourself to be like in that position?
So I actually, in the past, has it been a year now, became a supervisor at work. And that was a little weird at first because it wasn't something that I asked for necessarily. It was just something that was kind of handed to me and another coworker. And it was like, okay, you're going to directly supervise the students who work at the service desk in the library now. I work at an academic library. And that was like, it was interesting because I don't I don't necessarily seek out leadership positions, but I think the fact that it was given to me said something about what, my supervisors believed that I and my coworker were capable of. And I didn't want to let them down. And I feel really honored when people give me sort of responsibilities like that. So it's been a good learning experience. I think one of the things that I think the hardest thing for me is just I'm so used to focusing on my own job, and now I have other people's jobs to focus on too, and kind of shifting that awareness from just like what's in front of me to the people around me, and taking some level of responsibility for that has been challenging. I really like all the students that I work with, and I get along with them very well, so that helps a lot. I think giving them more difficult feedback is really hard, because I don't like to upset people. I don't like recently we had a situation where we had to sit down with one of the students and talk to her about something that she'd been doing that was not okay. And she was having a really bad day that day, even though we framed it in a really positive way. She started crying like halfway through the meeting, and it was really hard. And I felt really terrible afterwards, but and it's fine now, but that can be a really challenging aspect of, I guess, being in a leadership role. I think also like something that I do well as a leader is I take feedback into account. So if people want something done differently, that have other ideas, I'm very open to listening and sort of incorporating feedback into my whatever it is that I'm doing. I really want to make sure that as many people feel as comfortable and as accommodated as possible. That can also be, that kind of has a flip side to it where I can be too accommodating and then end up with, kind of like tying myself up with too many responsibilities or just making too many exceptions for individuals. But I think that can also be a strength. So,
Natalie, I was curious when you were talking about having to have an awkward meeting with someone and give negative feedback. I was just curious do you find yourself couching the negative feedback with so many qualifiers and like positive things that it is almost hard to be effective when you're giving the negative feedback? Or are you good at just kind of laying out what the problem is, but doing it just nicely?
I think the latter. I think the former is something that I might have been tempted to do, but I took a class about like how to give feedback, and they were kind of cautioning against doing that too much. They called it like the poop sandwich, where like you give someone like a good, something good, and then you give them the negative feedback and then something good at the end. But I guess the problem is that can kind of teach people to like expect negative feedback when they're given like something positive, or like it's just, I don't know, there were different problems with it. So I think I try to be as understanding as possible. So I might say something like, I don't know, let's say if they were rude to a customer, like, here's something better you could say, or like, I understand that you might have been having a rough day, whatever. So I guess I just try to put myself in their shoes, kind of like you said earlier, and think about what might have been going through their head when, whatever it was happened. But I do try to be very direct. And I find that I'm actually pretty good at being polite but direct. I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. Thank you.
In your thoughts?
I mean, I think it sounds like a really interesting experience you've had so far, Natalie. I'm sure you've been finding that as like a really good avenue for growth. I personally, I don't think I've really been in positions of what I would call leadership very much. I mean, I guess in like the times when, like if I'm training somebody or just kind of technically in charge of like a person or two for a day. I think, yeah, like I think I would just I don't even know how to word it. Just basically, yeah, be like make sure that, you know, things things happen the way that they're supposed to happen, and like we're on track. But I would always be like polite about things, never be like too demanding. And I guess if I were in more of like an actual leadership position, kind of like everyone was saying, like I think I would be very attentive to the people that I am leading, and, you know, always try to be understanding, make sure they feel like they are being accommodated. Yeah, I think I would be like a very people focused leader.
I can speak to having some leadership roles in magazines, and I found that I felt like things were a little easier for me when it was a smaller team and a smaller organization. I think that, you know, there are advantages to either one in many different ways. When it's a larger group, I find that there are, you know, more departments, bigger departments, and there are also a lot more leaders that you're interacting with, and there's a lot of interaction among those different leaders, and sometimes there are conflicting priorities, and sometimes questions about, you know, whose authority kind of rules on a particular situation. And I find that can be somewhat stressful, because I want to accommodate whatever the right thing is or whatever needs to get done. And I don't have a problem not being the person that gets to decide, but I want the clarity, you know, on you know, who's making the decision and who are we sort of listening to the most on this particular question, you know. And I think that I definitely found in my experience that while I can do both, when it's a smaller group and the hierarchy is pretty clear, that was definitely more comfortable for me as far as being effective and getting things done. So.
Yeah, well put. Really interesting to learn about ISFJs in leadership roles. And so, what are some things that you do that are quirky that people notice about you? Stuff that people point out about you, or stuff that just you find quirky?
I ask a lot of questions. People have pointed that out. I'm actually more cognizant of it now. In a job I had a little while ago, before I really got into the position fully, I had this huge list of questions that I asked my boss. And to me, it made sense because I wanted to know everything that I needed to do the best job I could. But I think some people were surprised by that. And I remember my boss said that she had a conversation with my supervisor at one point, and they were commenting, "Julie asks lots of questions." And then the other person said, "Yes, but she never asked the same question twice." And it was just funny to me that people had thought about it that much, because to me, it just made sense to ask a lot of questions to know how to follow all the procedures and rules and do the right thing. But I felt like I learned from that experience. And, you know, in the library job that I do as an aide, you know, there are different programs to learn and different procedures to follow, but I really tried to focus this time on getting the essentials down and asking questions a little bit more as things come up, instead of sort of trying to anticipate in advance, you know, all possible things that might come up, or try to know everything about a particular program. So that's been a bit of a learning experience for me, and seems to be working out pretty well.
Yeah, introverted sensing likes to be clear on the rules, protocol, and procedure of something, because it wants to do it right. It wants the sequential order of how to actually do something, because you don't want to make mistakes on the first run. You avoid mistakes when possible.
I can speak kind of related to that, or just along the general subject of, you know, like trying to do everything like exactly right and avoid mistakes. And it's related to what we were saying earlier too, because they're all kind of examples of like being thorough. I guess the things that I think of, so just, I guess, thoroughness in general. Like, for example, we use micropipettes a lot at work, and they're like, I don't know, they're just little like handheld things you use to transfer really small volumes of liquid, like less than a mil usually. And like usually when you know, like mix two things together, you're supposed to mix like a few times. Like if it's actually mentioned in the instructions, it might say between 5 to 15 times. And some people, you know, like they just do it like twice. Sometimes then they'll think it's good enough. But I feel like people have noticed, like I do it like a lot, because I probably do it between 15 and 20. And I don't know, it's just, I guess that is truly like a little quirk, because it's just like a little thing, but like some of my friends at work have noticed. And yeah, or also on the subject of thoroughness, like I think some of my colleagues, like they'll point out, you know, when doing certain procedures, like there's always like best practices that you should be doing. Like I tend to make sure I do every little like best practice, like precaution, and not everyone does that. And I don't know, like some of my colleagues have like pointed it out. It's like not making fun of it, but like kind of laughing, but it's like, oh, like it's a good thing. Yeah. Sorry, that was kind of like long to explain.
So I think probably the main thing is like something I already mentioned earlier, which is keeping my little notebook with lists of stuff that I need to do. And that's something that people have pointed out. But I don't, other than that, I don't know if I can really think of anything in particular. One thing that I noticed recently is that, and for some reason, I think when it comes to like my detail orientedness, I kind of just assume that everybody else notices that stuff too. So like there was a sign in the elevator that like ever since I've started working there, it has said, so instead of faculty study rooms, which are on the 3rd floor, so there's like a sign of everything that's on the different floors. And it says facility study rooms, 3rd floor. And I've always noticed that. And it's like, it had bugged me for a while, but I just figured that like whoever was in charge of the signs knew about it, but they didn't care enough to fix it. So I didn't say anything. And then somebody one day came up to the service desk and was like, your sign says facility study rooms instead of faculty study rooms. I was like, oh yeah, I know. And I'll tell the person who makes the signs. And the person who makes the signs was like, oh wow, I didn't notice that. Like, thanks for pointing it out. Like they were so grateful. And I was like, how do you not notice these things? But I guess that's something that, I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe because of just like personal insecurities, I tend to notice details like that, but I don't always point them out. And so that's something that I want to get a little more comfortable doing, because, you know, sometimes it's like I noticed a coworker forgot to check something out to somebody and just gave it to them. And at the time I didn't say anything, but I was like, if I notice that again, I'm going to say something. And I said something after the fact, because then they noticed it. I was like, oh yeah. But I don't know. I guess I catch little things like that. So
I always think it's interesting that I'm very attentive to details like that, but you know, and I guess because maybe it's not because it's an SE thing, but I feel like in my physical environment, I'm not as attentive. Like for instance, with driving directions, like it takes me a while to get familiar with going someplace. And even if I've done it a lot, I don't really notice a lot of the details of, you know, say, you know, such and such building or different streets that I'm passing along the way. And I always find that it seems like such a paradox to me that I would be so attentive. You know, if I'm watching a YouTube video and there's a typo, I'm like, oh, they spelled that wrong, you know? So I'll notice those little details, even when it's not that important. And yet in the external environment, in that kind of a situation, like the driving, and obviously I'm paying attention to where I'm going, but as far as some of the details of the route, it takes me a while to get used to it. And then I won't remember a lot of the details. I don't know if you all have similar experiences.
yeah, for sure. I feel like I'm like a huge space cadet when it comes to my like external surroundings. And sometimes even my mom, who's an ENFP, will be like better at noticing those things than I am. And I think maybe it's just like the introverted nature of like, well, introverted sensing. I feel like if it's something that I'm really familiar with, or kind of like somewhere where I'm pointing my hyper focus, I'm really good at noticing those things. But otherwise, it's like things just kind of fly past me. Like I'm kind of known at when I lived at home for opening the fridge and not being able to see stuff that was right in front of me that I was looking for. So I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, I unfortunately can also relate to that. Yeah, it is a very weird paradox because like you guys, I'm sure as well, I consider myself, like very observational and detail oriented, and there are a lot of times like where I am, but I don't know, it's almost as if like I guess maybe it's just I have such like an in-depth focus on whatever I am actually focusing on that then I just kind of miss like stuff outside of it. So I guess that's what it is, but I definitely relate.
Yeah, I almost feel like there's like a template in my head for like things I'm familiar with. So I'm really like naturally pretty aware of like grammar and like what's proper grammar and what's not. And so if something isn't, it'll like really stick out to me because it doesn't match the like, this is how it's supposed to be. But with other things, it's like I could be totally oblivious to something happening, 2 feet away from me that I just wasn't focused on.
Absolutely. Well put, guys. So with introverted sensing, it's very attentive with certain things that it has within its perception radar, and other things that are outside of that, they can be completely oblivious to. So for instance, let's say someone has an ISTJ boss. The ISTJ boss may notice when you cut the onions perfectly and they're diced just the way that he wants them, but he may not notice if he doesn't care about the floor being dirty. The SE user walks in and it's like, but your floor is dirty. Like how the onions are cut. Okay. Whereas the SI is very like particular with the certain sensations that it notices typically. SE just notices everything indiscriminately. And so, yeah, no, that's really cool. And a cool fact that you pointed out. And so do you guys have any more quirks? Anything people you notice about yourself?
I'll notice when it comes to procedures and things like that, and this is something more I notice about myself, that it's not something other people have pointed out, but I might set up a rule or a procedure for myself, and at some point or other, it might stop working or be less effective, and I will find it difficult to come up with a new paradigm, sort of a new way of doing things, because I'm so familiar with that even though it was something I set up for myself and it's not something that externally has been, forced upon me, it feels difficult to break out of that pattern. Or I might try to make all these little tweaks to it, like come up with a system that's maybe even more complicated than the original one, but that I feel convinced is going to work. And these are for small things. It could be like scheduling or planning or something. And I'll realize later, actually, I really needed to just do something completely different and really simplify this. But it becomes hard sometimes to recognize that in the moment. I think maybe partly because of the SI, where it becomes this sort of established routine and something familiar that I feel like I need to follow, even if there is, it's somewhat arbitrary that I'm following it to begin with. So that's one thing I've noticed that does crop up occasionally.
Yeah, I think I can relate to like trying to come up with new things and making it maybe more complicated than it needs to be, just like in general. And then I realize, oh, I could probably just, or somebody will mention something and I'm like, oh, that makes a lot more sense and it's a lot more simple. But kind of on the same theme of like procedures, I guess it's not work related, but when I was in college, my roommates all noticed that I was very systematic in my bedtime routine. So I would do like the same things in the same order every night. It was like I would stretch, I would eat a snack, I would brush my teeth, I would use the bathroom one more time, and then I would go to bed. And it was just always this very like set pattern of things. And I didn't realize that was like odd or different about me until my roommate pointed it out. And then I got self-conscious about it. I was like, is this weird? Like, but I've always been like that and I'm still like that. Oh, and then I had a question for everyone before I forget. Does everyone know what their Enneagram types are? I'm a 6. I don't know. I've just been kind of thinking about it as people have been talking, like how Enneagram might play into it as well.
I'm an Enneagram 1.
I called it.
Yeah, I'm an Enneagram 6 also.
I feel like those things, some of the attention to detail and the meticulousness and the concern with getting things right seems to relate both to the 1 and the 6. You have the sort of anxieties and the concern with the perfectionism. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, 1 was one of the types that I feel like when I take Enneagram tests, it comes up a little higher than the others. Like 8 is usually the lowest. And then I get like 1, 2, 9, and 6 are all like kind of, I don't know, the types that I relate to more, but I'm definitely a core 6. So yeah, that's cool.
Cool. Yeah. Those are the most common ISFJ Enneagram types that Natalie just mentioned. And so, any other quirks?
I don't know if this is a quirk or if this is even MBTI related. I find I've always been pretty good at memorization, and that's been really helpful with acting. I'm usually one of the first people to be off book and know my lines, and people will be like, how did you memorize all that so fast? But that just comes pretty easily to me. It's been a strength that's been really helpful.
I think that's a really good point, Julie. There's this theory about how SJs make the best classical musicians. If you were to put it on a trend, so it doesn't apply to everyone, but like an SJ may be more likely to become a better classical musician because of their ability to withstand repetition and the rote memorization needed to get the notes just right and make it sound great, and also memorize the entire piece too. Whereas if you have like a NP type with higher up NE in the first or second slot, it might take a lot more work for them to be a good classical musician because they don't like repetition as much, and their rote memorization is not as good as SJs tend to be at it. So you bring up a good point, and I think it would be very resonate with a lot of people.
That's actually really interesting that you brought up memorization and the whole like being a classical musician thing. I feel like with that, I played flute in high school and college, and I always hated the repetition of practicing. But with other things like my writing, I feel like with that I can take a piece and I can refine it or edit it for like ages. Like I really like going back and like getting a sentence just right, or like explaining something in a really clear way. And I have just always enjoyed that process of like writing something and then really refining it and getting it perfect. So maybe I can kind of apply it to that. But I also like memorization. I got really into this game at work that my students were playing. It was like you had to type in all of the names of the different countries, and there's like 197 of them. And I did it so much that I eventually memorized all 197. And my students were like, "What are you doing? Like, like, how did you do this?" So I just kept playing it, and I would like supplement it with other games to kind of like figure out where different countries were, and then I made up like I don't know what you call it, like mnemonic devices or something to like memorize the order of certain countries. And so yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. And then it made me want to like find other things to memorize too, just because it's fun.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences to multiple of these examples that are being talked about. Yeah, like back in school, I know I was really good at, like I would make the Quizlet flashcards to prepare for like an exam, and I would just cycle through them over and over. And I think because a lot of what was required for school was memorization, essentially, it served me very well. And I also played piano for a lot of my life growing up. And although I never practiced, like for a very long time at once, I definitely didn't mind like the repetition. And yeah, I think it was just very relevant that was mentioned. And even for like the geography type memorization, I think at some point last year, like so there's this like geography related game that I've played online. It's called Geoguessr. It's like super fun. It puts you in some random place on like Google Street View, and you have to like figure out where you are. But related to that, I decided like I wanted to start memorizing, not only like where all the 50 US states are, but I wanted to try memorizing like where each country was. So there was one night I went like into a rabbit hole, and I was doing it for like every region of the world until I achieved like 100%. I mean, I don't remember most of it now, but yeah, it's just very relatable what you guys are all talking about.
That Geoguessr game sounds really fun. I think you might have like turned me on to my next game addiction.
Oh my God, please try it. It is a really good time.
I have also played geography games and wanted to memorize this place of the states and the countries, and I play piano, so definitely relate to all of that too. I am really curious, based on what we're talking about with repetition, as to whether in your work experiences and personal experiences, if you feel like there's a kind of a sort of a threshold that you feel comfortable with in terms of getting a task done. Like, for instance, when I've worked in magazines, I worked at one publication where we had pretty much a monthly magazine, and then I worked somewhere else where we had multiple magazines going at once, and they kind of hung around for a longer time. And I found that for me, it seemed like I liked having enough time to feel like I wasn't stressed to push something out. But if things hung around too long, I could get too obsessive about rechecking things over and over, and the fact that things weren't done, like it wasn't out into the world. I don't know if that's sort of the judging part of the ISFJ, where it likes to see things completed. And I also feel like, I can certainly work on multiple projects at once, but if I had my way, I often like to kind of work on one thing and finish it and then move on to something else. Even if I have to interrupt the first task to work on something more pressing, I want to like finish that second thing to completion and then go back to the first one. I don't know if that's something that you've all experienced as well.
Yeah, I definitely like getting things done, and I feel like I'm more satisfied when I can just finish one thing first before, like, I feel like having lots of different projects can be kind of overwhelming. And then sometimes I have a hard time, like, I mean, I can prioritize, but it'll always feel like, oh, there's little loose ends over here that I just don't want to have to worry about while I'm working on, something. And I think that's also part of the reason I keep my list, is because I like to check things off and feel like I've gotten stuff done. So yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, I relate as well. It's of course I can like juggle a few things at once. I prefer that I can, kind of like single task and just put a lot of my effort towards one thing. And if things don't really reach some sort of like completion or something that, like, I don't know, it feels like you haven't reached a checkpoint yet, then even though work has been done on it, still it could be easy to feel like progress hasn't really been made. So I don't know, that could be kind of tough sometimes. And kind of, Julie, like what you were saying about if you are allowed to hang on to something too long, you'll just keep refining and refining it. I also like relate to that. There have been times, like after doing an experiment and I need to like put the data together, then like there have been times where like my boss is asking for it and I'm like, wait, like it's not in like the right format that I want it yet. And I think there was a moment I was like how long do I actually need to feel like something is like done like to the standard that I want it? Because you can't always actually take all that time to keep refining. Sometimes you just have to keep pushing things out, which can be a little hard if you have perfectionist tendencies.
Yeah, I totally get that. I feel like that was one of the things that when I was in high school, we had to write papers like every week for a history class that I had. And I would always end up turning them in late because I was just so concerned about getting everything perfect, it would actually cause me to like procrastinate on writing it, even though I like to be done early with things. And then I'd end up writing it at the last minute and have to turn it in anyway. So I've definitely struggled with like wanting everything to be kind of wanting every little detail to be in place before feeling like something is finished. But I think I've gotten better at just sending that email, just whatever, turning whatever it is in and being done with it.
Yeah, it seems like the meticulous nature and wanting to triple check things, going over your piece of writing again and again and again, allows you to iron out all the details to make them as perfect as possible. And that can cause a little bit of a paralysis.
I found it helpful to think about, how much time is this task actually worth? And that can be kind of scary when you evaluate it and you realize, oh my gosh, I spent, 5 minutes on this email and it really doesn't matter. So that's been one thing that's helpful. I'm also always interested in time management tips and tricks. Like when people talk about the sort of 80-20 rule where you have, I always want to say this incorrectly, but I think it's like 20% of your effort yields 80% of the results. So you're trying to focus on those few really essential points that are going to maximize what you're getting. And I think that often feels contradictory for me because when I was growing up, I was a huge studier and always, needed to get the A+, and I would just study exhaustively everything and go through all the examples. For instance, for a math test, I would go redo all the problems to prepare. And so it was a very comprehensive way of going about things. But as you get older and then as you are in the professional field, you don't have the time to do that, and it's not effective either. And so that was a bit of a shift for me mentally. So I like reminding myself of those tips that I've heard other people give about productivity, and remembering that sometimes, you're getting limited returns after a certain point with the perfectionism. And so that's something I try to keep in mind to keep myself on track.
Yeah, I also was thinking exactly of the 80-20 rule, like as we were talking about this. I also don't know if I'm like remembering it correctly. I think it might be something like 20. Actually, no, I don't even remember it. But yeah, I think like when I first was hearing about that concept, because I am very used to, trying to basically give 100% at everything, even if it's like kind of something that doesn't really deserve that extra effort and time. Kind of having a wake-up call that you need to kind of like redistribute your time and effort to things accordingly. Like in order to really like get ahead and not burn out, like you have to do that. You can't just the fact that it can actually kind of hold you back if you don't do that is, I don't know. It was very new to me. Like it was a shock. And I think I'm still trying to like work on applying that. But yeah, it's very different from like how I would naturally be.
This is really interesting. It's actually my first time hearing of the 80-20 rule in this context. I know of a couple different 80-20 rules, but they're not related to this at all. So that's actually really helpful. I do feel like sometimes I put in way more effort to like something that doesn't matter than I need to. So that's really cool. I'm glad that you brought that up, Julie.
Cool, yeah. Any other quirks that you can think of?
I wouldn't say this is a quirk necessarily, but I think for me, sometimes the FE, it's interesting in terms of prioritizing tasks, how if there are things that mostly depend on myself versus tasks that, involve somebody else, like if someone sends an email and they want an answer to something, that email, it may be a sort of semi-urgent, but not super important. And there might be something else that I have that's not as urgent, but more important. And it can be tricky to sort of rein in the FE a little, that wants to sort of respond to the other person and immediately tend to that question or that need. If there's something else you need to prioritize, that's more, based around your own work. So that's something I definitely pay attention to try and make sure that my priorities are in the right place.
Kind of going along with that, I almost feel like I'm more motivated to work on things, even in my personal life, like my creative pursuits. I feel like I'm more motivated to work on things if I have somebody keeping me accountable, or if it's something for somebody else rather than just for myself. Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples of that, but that's all I wanted to say.
Well, I can say, going along with that, I feel like even though the way that we're sort of defined as introverted is that we're filtering everything through the internal world, and that's sort of supposed to be the real world, I also feel like, and maybe it's partly because we have the FE as auxiliary, but things that I'm working on don't always feel full or real or complete until there is a sort of externalization of it. So for instance, I'm working on a novel, and I have a writing group. So I feel like when I am presenting pages to them and they're responding to it, that helps make my project feel more real than when I'm just working on it by myself. And definitely, someday when hopefully it's published in some format, that will also make it feel more real and concrete. And so, yeah, I think that there is an element of feeling motivated by seeing something come to fruition in the real world, whether it's, helping a library patron find a book, or, interacting with other actors on a script, as opposed to doing the work that I would do at home by myself, or, working on a writing project and actually seeing it published, or at least sharing it with somebody else, as opposed to just working on it alone.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I write a lot of poetry, and for a while I was really, and I may still do this, but I've kind of put it on the back burner. I really want to self-publish a book of poetry because I want to be able to hold it in my hands and be like, I wrote this. And I don't know, like something about it is really satisfying. And then I think just like, it was like a few months ago, I was getting really nostalgic about when I was in school. I studied English, and I really enjoyed like reading books for class and then going in and having like class discussions about it. And I feel like I would read more in my free time if I knew that I had to like discuss it with the class later. And I don't know, something about that was really fun for me. Yeah, it definitely made it feel more real. And then I liked getting other people's ideas and interpretations of what it was in the book. It just kind of made it all like come to life for me, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Getting that external feedback really helps, or getting people involved, not just having you on the line, but other people on the line. It helps motivate, for sure. All right. And so my next question for you guys is, what advice would you give to ISFJs around careers and work?
I think for me, I guess this has more to do with like my experience. Like when I was in high school, I really tried to be good at everything. Like, because the people that I hung out with were like the smart kids. And so I wanted to do advanced math. I wanted to do science. I wanted to do, all the stuff that they were doing. And I feel like while I did put effort into the things that I really liked, I kind of feel like if I could go back, I would probably lessen some of the responsibilities on myself and just go for what I really liked and what I enjoyed. I would say just like go for what you want. I feel like as ISFJs, we can get kind of caught up in like, or at least I can get caught up in what other people might expect of me, or what seems like makes quote unquote the most sense to do. But I think there were things that I missed out on because of that. And, there were pros to it as well, because I learned a lot. But I think going for what you really want is important, and not like second guessing yourself or your instincts about what you really like.
Do you all deal with second guessing a lot?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I guess everything Natalie just said, that was really good. I definitely think, like kind of always staying attuned to what you want is very important, and not just getting caught up in like what's expected or what would be like the most impressive or anything like that. I think and this does kind of segue into like confidence in yourself. I think when you're unsure and you're trying to, just sift through all these different like opinions and like just different, like a bunch of input from a bunch of different sources, I think usually like deep down you do know what you want, and you need to just really try to tap into that and like honor it. At least that's what I've found to be true. And yeah, I think like believing in yourself and just like being confident in, like your like your abilities, knowing yourself and like your decisions, I think that's just a really big thing, at least for me personally, especially as an Enneagram 6. I think that would be like probably the biggest thing that would like make a difference in like growing in your career. Because at least personally, I feel like a theme that I've heard for feedback for like where I can improve over time, like a lot of people, they always say like, oh, well, like you're very good at like what you do, and you're very thorough and meticulous. But I think you'd benefit from like being more confident in yourself, because yeah, like when you do develop that confidence in yourself, then it just kind of helps you like not hold yourself back quite as much, and like just actually like stand behind what you think more, and it just helps you like put yourself out there more. Because I mean, it feels a lot more natural to be behind the scenes for sure, but in a way, if you're always behind the scenes, like I don't know, like how far are you gonna go? Like, are you gonna achieve like what you want that way?
Yeah, and the second guessing nature is why I believe a lot of ISFJs tend to type out as Enneagram type 6 a lot, because that is one of the types that are known to doubt themselves a lot. But it's also due to the auxiliary FE, that if someone else says something, hey, I don't have the same opinion as you. Like FE considers people a lot. So what happens if someone else gives you a contrary opinion, it'll make you want to consider that and to connect with them. And also the SI is like, well, what if there's a procedure that I'm missing out on, that I could have gotten this wrong? And so then it causes some doubt, second guessing. And so, cool. All right.
One of the things that you said to me, Joyce, that I found so insightful before was that ISFJs try to plan without doing. And so in keeping with what, Natalie and Jane are talking about in terms of going for what you want and putting yourself out there, I find that my tendency is often to try and anticipate how something will turn out and decide based off of that, sometimes without putting myself out for more information, because it feels like that in itself feels like it's making a commitment or taking a big leap. And I find that I've had to push myself more to take even, smaller risks, obviously safe risks, but, career-wise or activity-wise, to pursue opportunities or try things and learn a little bit more from experience, as opposed to just trying to learn and decide based on how I think things might go, or how I'm sort of working through a problem in my head. I guess it almost feels like, the NE side, anticipates all these possibilities, and some of them are really positive and some of them are really negative. And it's sort of like, I want to be in like a computer game or something where I'm trying out, well, what happens if I do this, and then you can see all the results and see what the best one is. And you can't always do that in life, but I feel like being a little more willing to try things and learn from experience, whether I liked it or not, helps prevent some of that second guessing, because it closes the loop, whereas if I have sort of decided something without that external feedback in the world, it doesn't feel like it's done yet. So even if I've made a decision, I might come back to it later and say, but I didn't try this, or I didn't try it this way. So maybe it would have turned out differently. So I feel like making a little more of an effort to put myself out there helps prevent some of that second guessing. And then I can feel more confident in what I want for myself in a career or in activities, because I've actually gone out and experimented a little. And I found that to be helpful.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to everything that that Jane and Julie have said, both with like feeling like lack of confidence is almost like my biggest flaw. Like, I don't know, that almost sounds like a humble brag. Like, I'm just not confident enough in myself, but like, it's true. And it really does, like, when you second guess yourself, I think sometimes I feel like I'm not contributing as much as I could, just because I take so much time to like figure out whether what I'm doing is the right thing rather than just trying something. So I think that's been something that I've had to work on. And then the whole like planning without doing thing, I can totally relate to that. Even with my little notebook, I'll get my list of things and then I'm like, I don't know what to do first. Or just like, I don't know, put stuff off, which is a really bad habit of mine. But yeah.
At the same time, I was thinking, before we get on to the topic of taking risks and putting yourself out there, I was thinking about how I think it's very easy to devalue the introverted side of things and to feel like, well, if I'm not doing something big and exciting and huge in the world, then, you know, that's a sign of cowardice or fear or not living up to my potential. And I think that's, you know, partly just kind of a media thing where, you know, you see people, you know, let's say you watch a movie about somebody pursuing a career, and you're not going to watch somebody necessarily, you know, go and be a library aide or sit and write and work on a magazine article. You know, you're going to see them doing something, you know, big and dramatic, and that's very, very external. And so I think that's all wonderful, but I think it can be easy to then devalue the stuff that is quieter or smaller, not in the sense that it has less of an impact or is less important, but I think it can be easy, maybe as an introverted person, to think, oh, well, because I'm not doing something that's as big or external, I'm not big enough. Like, I'm not willing to do those big things, but it may not be what is going to make us happy or what really works well with our personality. And it's so important, I think, to focus on our strengths and lean into them and love that part of ourselves. And we can, I think, be too hard on ourselves in that regard and not value what we're doing enough if it isn't, you know, big and external. So I think that's something that hopefully will help other ISFJs to think about, is, you know, don't devalue yourself just because you're not doing what maybe you admire in somebody else who's taking up a little more space in the world.
Yeah, I feel like there could be a lot of, I guess, just like messaging nowadays, you know, like if you're not doing something like big and grand and flashy, that you're not really actually doing anything. But that's not true, because there are a lot of important things that need to get done that aren't flashy. And maybe that's not everyone wants flashy anyway. So
Yeah, to kind of echo what's already been said, there's definitely a bias towards extroversion in like US culture and in other cultures too. And I think that can make sometimes introverts in those cultures feel like they're not living up to the ideal. And I think that was something that was really helpful for me to learn, that like not every culture actually values extroversion to the degree that that US culture does. So there's kind of a maybe somewhat of an environmental mismatch there, but I think I took that in an encouraging sense, because it means that right, like everyone else has said, if you're not doing something big and flashy, it doesn't mean that you're, you know, less worthy or that you're not doing enough with your life. So there's definitely value to the quieter side of life for sure. And there are things that, need to get done that maybe people who are doing those big flashy things can't do. So everyone is valuable and contributes something.
Great. And so on that note, thank you, ISFJs, for coming out and discussing your personality type in the context of work. It's nice to know how meticulous, how careful, how thoughtful you are with creating things, and you want to make sure you do it perfectly. And so you put in the effort to refine your writing, or with experiments that Jane does, she makes sure to double check them to make sure that all the details are in the right place. And we need that because that's what makes things work. Because if there is a detail out of place, that could really mess up with the whole thing. So yeah, it's nice to hear about how humble you all are. You may have a tremendous skill set, but you tend to not need to show it off. So although you have all these amazing things about you, there tends to be a very quiet behind the scenes quality to y'all too. And so it seems like it's easy to underestimate yourself because a lot of the work, it might seem like, oh, this is what people are supposed to be doing. So like, how can I feel confident about this? Because I feel like it's what people should be doing. But I think that these are really good skills to have, and that sometimes we downplay the things about ourselves because it's so natural to us. So it could be so hard for another person. Like memorizing all of the geography of somewhere could be the most difficult task to someone, but for you, you're able to do it. But you're like, oh, I can do it. So it's no big deal. But it is a big deal for other people who suck at it. So I mean, yeah, I would just say like ISFJs, feel free to see more impressiveness in what you do because it is impressive. It's interesting to hear about your stories, about how y'all are organized and the quirks, and how two of you are librarians. And so that's a meaningful coincidence. And so, yeah, thanks, Nat, for coming out. And you really have this extroverted intuition quality about you. And it really shows in your quirky sense of humor. Like you're really funny and really quirky. And if you wanted, maybe I could feature one poem of yours in one of the screens here to preview people on your poetry book. That's a thing that's low key about ISFJs, that they're really good at puns. And it can be quite funny for some of them. And so, Jane, thanks for showing the more science side of ISFJs to show that there is quite the career diversity within the type. And so that while there are trends, there's always people who are going to have different kinds of careers too. And the main thing, the most important thing is to follow what is the best for you. So if you know you like certain things, you should go for it. Just as what Nat was saying, go for your dreams, whatever those dreams are, because they're individual to you, because you are your own person. And thanks, Julie, for coming out. I really appreciate your commentary as the Enneagram one on the panel. And yeah, it's quite cool. You went to Harvard Business School, but you don't tell anyone about it. I'm like, most prestigious university, yet keeps low key about it because it's an ISFJ.
Oh, yeah, it was just Harvard for undergrad, but it was an amazing experience, and I was very grateful to get to go there.
It shows the humbleness of the ISFJ. If it were another type, they might flaunt that every single place they go. But yeah, a privilege and a pleasure to have all of you on this panel. And so thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you.